There's a question about how you decide when to communicate and what to communicate. I find with Jonathan, 95% of the communications are completely normal. We have ordinary conversations. There are little things which need dealing with. We deal with them. It's the difficult ones that's where the question arises. And by difficult, it means I want him to do something differently. Those are the difficult ones. The first principle is that I can't change his fundamental nature. I can't make him into someone that will know instinctively that there is still grease on the pan, so it needs to be scrubbed a little more. That's not going to happen. He's never going to be someone that instinctively, when he takes off a shirt or a jumper, will fold it up and put it away rather than just letting it drop on the floor. That's not going to happen. I have to work with the reality that's in front of me. And the thing that I've come up with my other friends in recovery is this notion of the polite request, which I mentioned earlier. Now, the one thing I'd say about the polite request, if you're someone that gives someone 18 polite requests a day, they're no longer polite requests in aggregate, they're something else. You're now the foreman of the building site. So, with the things that I want Jonathan to do differently, the way I treat it is that I've got a few vouchers to use. Now, there are 100 things I could want to be done differently, which in an ideal world meaning a world according to my design, there are 100 things which I could conceivably want to be done differently. But the question is, how important is it? What really matters? And I spend the vouchers very carefully, because there's only a certain amount of goodwill another human being has. There's only a certain number of direction that a person can take from someone else. I know that from my own experience. If I'm constantly ordered around, there's a threshold and I'm going to start pushing back. So with Jonathan, I wait until there's something that really matters. And that's when I make the requests. And he does the same with me. So I choose the battles very carefully. You mentioned about resentment and how could a person not be resentful, and you talked about safety, that's the resentment that protects you. In my experience, resentment comes with an inbuilt defense mechanism against its removal. So you get resentful and you try to pull the resentment out, and there are these hooks which are holding it in place. And one of the hooks that holds a resentment in place, it's like with a fish hook, it's a hook which doubles back on itself. So when the fish tries to release itself, it can't. So you need to wiggle it in two directions to get the fish hook out. And it's like that with resentment. As soon as I try to eliminate a resentment or rationalise it or get rid of it, the resentment seems to develop its own voice. And it says things like, if you let this go, they're going to walk all over you. Now, the important distinction I've had to make is between, it's that line on page 87 of the big book, when agitated or doubtful. Doubt is about what am I going to do. Agitation is about my emotional response to it. And I'm very, very boundaried when I'm in my right mind. What that means is I don't put up with rubbish. But those boundaries don't require me to be angry. So when the agency said to me the other day, we want you to reduce your rates by 40%, the boundary is to simply say, I'm not going to do that. I don't need to be angry to set the boundary. I need to be aware of what's acceptable and not acceptable and act accordingly. Does that make sense? Now, on top of that, I'm at liberty to be as upset as I want. And what was funny is that I set the boundary, I dealt with it, I checked it out with a couple of other colleagues. They said their behaviour is outrageous, you were right to say no, fine. I then started to think about it. By the time I'd been thinking about it on and off for 3 days, then I was angry. Now that anger is not protecting me, it's not doing anything. It's the boundary which provides the protection. The anger is only hurting me. And in the big book, between pages 66 and 67. On 67, it's going to give you some basic tools on how to get rid of resentment. But before that, it sets out the principles for why you should want to. And the first reason you should want to get rid of resentment is that it doesn't achieve anything. As Jonathan said, it needs to go because it's getting in the way. Secondly, it's potentially fatal. If you get angry enough for long enough, it'll shorten your life significantly and it'll destroy any quality of life you have in the meantime. Thirdly, I find it embarrassing. Embarrassing when small things in the world affect me. I'm like, so I'm the dancing puppet that when the music starts to play, look at me dance. I want to be in charge of my emotional life. I don't want my emotional life to be the consequence of other people's behaviour. That sucks. That's horrible. I want to have dominion over my own. That's why I want to get rid of resentment. It's not to let them off the hook, it's to let me off the hook. Does that make sense? So the question then, once you've got that out of the way, the question is much easier for how to actually get rid of it. Traditions in groups. Are there any specific questions people have about the traditions in groups? Any difficult situations which have arisen, rather than talking about it too much in the abstract? Go on.
I can just share my thing that whenever we have a conscious meeting, I feel very anxious and I want my voice to be, because I know what's best for the group and my opinion should be the best and people should accept it. And when people don't accept it, because my voice is equal to any other person in the room, I feel like I had to learn to pray for it before I went to conscious meetings, because it was so hard for me to accept that other people can choose and they can act on their own fears and their opinion will be accepted and not my opinion. I found it very triggering personally to go to a conscious meeting and come with this, I know what's best and I need to step back and say my voice is equal to everybody and God comes into the rooms and whatever God wants it's going to be and all this stuff.
Me too. Okay. So the first principle of belonging to a group is that it's not a substitute for belonging to God. So the group is simply today's channel for the higher power to express himself in my life. So that I get very tense in group consciences where people are discussing some change to the group. My immediate response to change is no. In any area of my life, my immediate response to a challenge is no. This shouldn't be happening. Everything should stay nice forever. That's how things should be. And so I get very threatened in group consciences. And I have to remember that my reliance is on the higher power, not on the group. So if the group goes in a different direction, that's fine. And I'll be fine. If I need to join a different group, if I need to start a different group, that's fine. That takes the edge off. It stops it being a mortal threat. It's now just annoying that they want to change everything. How decisions get made in groups. So tradition 2 suggests that the decision is made through a group conscience meeting. Now that seems like a really obvious statement, but with WhatsApp and email and other means of modern communication, what often happens, or even the telephone, people try and decide stuff outside the scope of the group. And people try to sew up decisions sometimes, and make decisions somewhere other than when you're sitting looking at people. And I'm sure you've noticed this, that you'll say things to people on the phone that you wouldn't be able to say to them looking them directly in the eye. Even worse, you can write things you would never dream of saying to the person's face. And I believe now more than ever, because of the other means of communication available, the notion of a group conscience meeting where you sit down and you have to actually have the courage to say things in front of other people changes what you say and how you say it on a good day. There can be other problems. Good hygiene as well for group conscience meetings. Groups that I belong to tend to make a distinction between business meetings and group conscience meetings. Group conscience meetings are where you discuss major questions which affect the structure of the group and the content. Business meetings is where you're talking about the practical implementation of those. So who's going to do the tea next week? Who's going to take the keys? We need to negotiate this with the venue. Maybe we need to be in a different room. And practical stuff, but not contentious stuff. And to have business meetings regularly so that people can air stuff straight away. You talk about communication and relationships. This is why business meetings have to be held regularly in a group, so that if problems develop, people can just say them straight away rather than having to raise this sort of demon of the group conscience meeting merely to point out maybe we could open the room 5 minutes earlier. Group conscience meetings, because they affect the structure of the group or the basic content of the group, are very threatening. They're threatening the thing which is the basis for people's survival. So don't hold a group conscience meeting every 8 minutes, because otherwise you're threatening stability every 8 minutes. Very little needs to be decided straight away. Bank up the questions and deal with them in a time and a space. So the worst thing for a group conscience meeting is to do it after the meeting, when everyone needs to be rushing home to dinner, rushing home to do this, to pick up, so-and-so from flute practice, where you have to force a decision straight away because there's no time for the decision to breathe. So everyone gets tense because no one wants to be that disaster. So a really healthy way of holding group conscience meetings is to hold them away from the usual time and space. Give it an hour, give it 2 hours. Loads of notice.
Sorry, we hardly managed to do fellowship, which is crucial in my opinion.
Yeah.
That bring the fellowship together with the conscience meeting.
We just finished a meeting 5 minutes earlier and I was staying on.
Okay. But the notion of time specially set aside, and also now this is so important, the groups that I've belonged to in the last 10 years, at group conscience meetings, you're allowed to discuss any ideas about the group should be like this, we should change the structure, the location, the time, the format, the content, but you never make a decision at the group conscience meeting. Now, because of that, it means you can discuss whatever you want because there's no danger of a decision actually being made. When does the decision get made? A month later, at the business meeting a month later. So you come up with ideas. By the end of the group conscience meeting, you have some proposals. And then people have a month to think about the consequences of those proposals. So no decisions get made suddenly. You get a chance to talk to your friends, to talk to your sponsor, to look at the traditions, to look at the concepts, to discuss it with whoever else you want, and then a month later the decision gets made, and the change is only ever made as a trial policy for review after 6 months. If after 6 months it's been great, you carry on doing it. If it's a disaster, you stop. So there's no real threat. There's no threat, therefore, to trying out something new. Because if it doesn't work, there's going to be a review point.
Do you never make a decision straight away? Like if it's just 5 minutes earlier, you can all say straight away what they think, or you always have to do it for a month?
It depends. So if we're talking about major decisions, like a major decision at one group was whether to let non-alcoholics attend the group. That's a major decision because it affects the whole tone. It affects what people feel able to say. It affects the tone of the group. It affects who is in the room and the energy of who's in the room. That's a major decision. If it's at the level of implementing basic decisions but just looking at detail, of course deal with those straight away. I'm talking about major changes in structure and format. So to make a big distinction between those two. Other good ideas for the group conscience meeting is to have the principle that time sharing, so someone has a timer and people get to share for 1 minute on the topic, and then anyone who wants to share on the topic can have their minute. No one's allowed to share twice until everyone that wants to say something has shared once. And then the chair of the meeting, who remains neutral. So the chair, whoever is chairing the group conscience meeting, expresses no opinions. They may point out questions of fact or tradition, but not express personal opinions, but they need to be neutral. They say, does anyone have any new ideas to present? Because my danger is that I will just keep repeating the same idea until everyone agrees with me. So the question that the chair poses, does anyone have anything new to add? If there is nothing new to add, or if someone has already said an idea, just because you agree with it doesn't mean you have to say something as well. And so there's some etiquette there which puts into principle this idea of democracy in the group, so that everyone's voice is equal. I've stopped expecting myself to be calm and peaceful and placid and without emotion. I'm going to be tense in group conscience meetings. What I've learned to do is to express myself calmly, even if I'm not feeling calm. And that's sometimes the best you can do. Any other group situations that people have struggled with?
Sometimes we have people share, if you want to say share appropriately according to guidelines. Is there anything we should be doing about it, or is it just I just do the best I can to share how I think is appropriate?
That's a good. So the question is about content of sharing and whether people sharing conforms with what the group has agreed and how you manage that. Okay. Tradition 5, the primary purpose of the group is to carry the message of recovery, whatever that is considered to be. But that's not the only tradition. There's tradition 1, which is about unity, and how you maintain unity is not by requiring uniformity. And in tradition 3, anyone can be a member, and in the long form of the tradition it says that doesn't require conformity in any way at all. So it means that someone can stay in the room even if what they're saying doesn't conform to what the group is requiring. Otherwise, effectively, if you police the sharing too strictly, you're effectively imposing a membership requirement. You're not doing it overtly, but you're doing it covertly. It's like, you can be here as long as ... you either say the right thing or shut up. And that's not full membership, that's conditional membership. So I'm never so keen on policed sharing. What else? Tradition 11, in terms of presenting the message. Now, Tradition 11 formally is about attraction, not promotion, to the fellowship generally. But within the fellowship, if I have an idea, the idea is that we present the ideas, but we don't force them on anyone in any way. So they are offered, and people can do with them as they wish. So that's how we implement Tradition 5 of having a primary purpose of carrying the message, is simply placing the message there for people rather than forcing it down anyone's throats. But there are boundaries to this. In AA groups in particular, you get quite a high rate of people with, as they call it, problems other than alcohol. So mental illness, personality disorders, all sorts of difficult stuff going on. People use the group as a venue for acting out old scripts with authority figures, with groups in the past. This becomes the place where they do the historical reenactment of whatever the unprocessed drama is. So you tend to get a lot of odd behaviour in groups. But my experience is that if the core of group members is very strong and they stick to the basic, we're going to share about the programme. So that my Friday night group is a Big Book step study. We read a passage from the Big Book on a step. Someone shares for 10 minutes, and then it goes around. People are invited to share. And what we say is we invite you, not we tell you. We invite you to share on the passage or on the topic of today. Now, not everyone does, but the sheer fact of example, eventually people want to, but if people want to belong, they will fall in with that over time, and it requires no coercion. There's that Al-Anon phrase, let it begin with me. If I want the group to change, I lead by example, which is the whole notion of leadership in tradition too, is that our leaders are but trusted servants, and it talks about it in the literature more generally, that leading is by example, not driving by mandate. You aren't given a mandate to force things on people. But the boundary, if the sharing becomes aggressive or personal, so people start talking about other people or becoming threatening in any way, the group should empower the secretary or whoever is sitting at the front running the meeting to encourage people to interrupt and say, could you please stick to sharing your own experience, strength and hope? And again, it's not stop doing this, but please can you do that? It's the notion of the polite, you're not criticising, you're redirecting. And that it never goes down well, but it goes down better than please stop sharing about your aunt so-and-so, or about the other group, or about the other people in the group. You redirect. Do you ever have problems with people becoming violent or aggressive? No. Yeah, so if that happens, you just find a couple of people in the group who are nominated as the people to take the person outside and sit with them. So it's not you take them out, you give them a kick in the behind and lock the door. No, you have a couple of people to take them out and sit with them, calm them down, talk to them, so they're not excluded from the fellowship or even the group, but they are prevented from negatively impacting the conduct of the group's business. But it's 19 out of 20 times it's men that do that, but be prepared, you will occasionally get someone with problems other than the problem that you're there for, and those can get acted out. Any other group situations that people have a question about?
For myself, I think I can, even in my own job, I like to do things properly or take responsibility, and I can get resentful if people don't do what they want to do, especially like in a good conscience. If it was said to do something X, Y, Z and it doesn't get done, just no one took it, then I can get
Can you give me an example of something that might not get done?
An example, if it was just a small thing to buy new books, just no one did it. I always think, can I do it, or is it my responsibility? Oh, okay.
So this covers a lot of points actually. This question. So the question about what happens when things are not done properly that were agreed. There's a line. It's either in chapter 8 or chapter 9 of the Big Book. Something like, "We women folk carry an ideal in our mind of the perfect husband," or something like that. And we can take that to the group as well. We can have this idea of how the perfect group should run. Now, what it talks about in the Big Book also on pages 69 and 70 is the notion that we have a sane and sound ideal for our conduct and that we are willing to grow towards it. And we're going to stumble, but then we recognise where something has gone wrong and we ask God to help us work towards that ideal. And I apply the same principle in my groups as well. So that I'm allowed to have an ideal for how I think the group should operate. But my question as a member of the group, what is my role in helping the group achieve that? Well, first of all, the rest of the group would have to share the ideal to start with. They may not do, and they're allowed not to. So I can have my own personal ideal, but it only becomes the group ideal if the group signs up to it. So that's the first point.
What do you mean by ideal?
A good example is some groups see their primary purpose as to carry the message of the 12 steps. Others will say, we just want this to be a safe place for people to share. Now, a safe place for people to share is a lot broader in terms of topic of what people can say in the meeting. Whereas we're going to talk about the 12 steps as a much narrower one. It's no good me going to a group where everyone just wants a safe place to share and me trying to impose my ideal of let's talk about the steps and nothing but the steps. I'd need a group of people who sign up to the same ideal before it becomes the group ideal. So I've got to respect a group. If a group wants to be relaxed, so there's one group I go to on a Tuesday where everything hangs out. I mean, there's people talk about anything there. There's very little about the steps, very little about God. A lot of very unconventional people there. I feel right at home. This is great. But that is not the group where I would want to uphold my personal ideals. I might demonstrate those ideals myself, but I wouldn't require that of the group. They've clearly got it worked out how they want to operate as a group. I would not interfere with that. So the ideal has got to be held by the group. Now, the way work gets delegated is there's this notion in the 12 concepts of ultimate responsibility and delegated responsibility. So the group, let's say the group decides as the group, we're going to buy literature to have it available to sell to newcomers or other people at cost price. Fine. That's the group decision. But the authority to actually go and buy the literature and then the responsibility for following through gets delegated to one of the group members who is the literature secretary. And this is under something called right of decision. So the group delegates a task and gets to define in concept 10 the scope of that authority and responsibility, the scope of the duties. What are the duties of the literature secretary? The group gets to decide that. But then within the scope of that, the literature secretary gets to decide. Some groups tell the literature secretary exactly what to buy. Others say, we'll leave it to you, we'll leave it to your discretion. To the extent that you leave it to someone's discretion to discharge the duty as they see fit, you have no right of complaint afterwards if you don't like it. You gave them the freedom. Now, when I'm given a job in AA, my duty is to take the initiative and act. That's the first thing. The second thing, if I need help, I ask for it. If I need to consult people, I consult, but then I report back. And one of the reasons home groups I have, the home groups I have that we have a business meeting is so that there is a natural forum for that accountability. So at the beginning of the business meeting, once we've got all the formalities out of the way, we run through all of the service assignments and get each person to report what they've done. So the treasurer reports, the literature secretary reports, the greeters report, any problems, any issues, anything that anyone wants to raise. And the culture of the group is at that point, if we're discussing literature, let's say Susan last month said she was going to buy some big books. There are no big books still. She reports. She might say, nothing to report. That is the point at which anyone in the group, or indeed the secretary who should have been, who should be keeping track of this, say, oh, by the way, the last business meeting, we asked if you could buy some big books. How are you going with that? Oh, I forgot, I'll do it this week, blah, blah, blah. So there's a mechanism for that built in without having to make a capital offence out of it. But also the very fact that someone knows they're going to have to report back to the group and that's going to happen automatically without anyone having to raise it, it makes people do it. So I have done service at all sorts of levels in AA over the years. And one of the levels is intergroup, where I would, for instance, do public information at intergroup. I hate doing it, but I've done it. I'm not even very good at it, but I've done it. And I tell you, the knowledge that there's an intergroup meeting where I'm going to have to report the week before the intergroup meeting, like 2 months, I've had 2 months to do something. 1 month, 3 weeks goes by, my guilt goes up and up and up, and finally, because I know I've got to report back, all of the activity happens in the week before. And so if you build the right structure, it encourages accountability without everyone having to monitor the whole time. Does that help at all? So, but the key thing is, I have the ideal for how a group should be. If the group does 30% of that, that's fine with me. The pass mark is 30%. The pass mark is not... My natural Anon pass mark is 98%. I'll maybe allow 2% to slip, but in reality, the pass mark is 20 to 30%. If we get that right, we're fine. We're coming to 1:30. I don't know if anyone has any other questions before we wrap up. Any other group issues that people want to raise?
We're a bit short on time, so I'll try to wrap it quickly. About the sharing, I found that sometimes I'm eager to share because I've learned how much it helps me, whatever, and I think some people are more shy, more thinking, hesitating what to share. Sometimes I feel if I interrupt or if I share again and again, they don't have their comfort time to think of what they want to share and share it out. But what's the right thing?
In terms of, I'm not sure I quite follow. Can you run that past me?
So like, yeah, we have some people that don't share, and I'm wondering, is it too bad, tough luck, or is it because shall I step back and allow some time for other people to think, or if there's a time slot, I can pop in and share my share?
I think you've got a different situation in S-Anon than we have in AA. In AA, there are 950 groups in London. If Bobby doesn't get a chance to share at my group, where there are like 55 people, where not everyone is going to get to share anyway, then Bobby can go somewhere else. If there are very few groups, I think the responsibility is different. I think the responsibility is there to allow more space. I mean, the groups that I go to tend to be there are very few very strong groups which are focused entirely on the steps. So what the group's conscience is there is to really have the people share who have the most experience to offer, and so it doesn't matter so much that it's the same 10, 15 people that share every week out of the 55, because often those are the people who are longest sober, the people with the